Okay, going to be reading the Memoirs of Casanova. Memoirs of Casanova. And here's the preface. Beginning with the preface to the Memoirs of Casanova. In spite of my excellent moral foundations, a necessary fruit of the divine principles rooted in my heart, all my life I have been the victim of my senses. I have delighted in going astray, and I have constantly lived in error, having no other consolation than that of being aware of my error. Thus, I hope, dear reader, that you will find no impudent boastfulness in my story, and that neither will you find an air of penitence, or the embarrassment of someone who blushes to confess his peccadilles. They are youthful follies. You will see that I laugh at them, and if you are kind, you will laugh at them with me. At the age of 72, in 1797, when I can truly say I have lived, even though I am still alive, it would be difficult for me to find a more pleasant pastime than conversing with myself about my own affairs and amusing the well-bred people who will be listening to me, who have always shown friendship for me, and whom I have always frequented. To write well, I have only to imagine that they will read me. Cultivating the pleasures of the senses has always been my main concern, and I have never had a more important one. Feeling that I was born for the fair sex, I have always loved women and done my best to make them love me. I have also been passionately fond of good food, and I have always been fascinated by objects which have aroused my curiosity. I have had friends who have been very kind to me, and I have enjoyed the happiness of being able to give them proof of my gratitude on all sorts of occasions. I have also had detestable enemies who have persecuted me and whom I have not exterminated only because it was not in my power to do so. I would never have forgiven them if I had not forgotten the harm they did me. Not all my adventures will be found in these memoirs. I have omitted those which might have embarrassed the people involved in them. In spite of my reserve, however, I will, no doubt, be found too indiscreet in some passages. If so, I am sorry. If I become wise before my death, I will burn everything. At this time, I do not have the courage. I have not written these memoirs for young people who, in order to avoid going astray, need to spend their youth in ignorance, but rather for those who have had enough experience in life to make them impervious to seduction. Since the true virtues are only habits, I hazard the opinion that truly virtuous people are those who practice them without effort. These people have no idea of intolerance, and it is for them that I have written. I would be glad to display the proud motto: one is always the author of one's own misfortune. If I were not afraid that I might shock the immense number of those who, whenever things go wrong, invariably cry out, "It is not my fault." They must be allowed to keep that small consolation, for without it they would eventually come to hate themselves, and self-hatred often leads to the thought of ending one's own life. As for me, since I acknowledge myself as the principal cause of all the good and evil that has befallen me, I have always been pleased to find myself in a position to be my own pupil and under the obligation to love my teacher. Chapter 1. In 1715, at the age of 19, Gaetano Casanova left his family, smitten with the charms of an actress named Fragoletta. Since he had no money, he made his living by dancing. 5 years later, he became an actor, distinguishing himself by his conduct even more than by his talent. Whether from inconstancy or jealousy, he left Fragoletta and joined a troupe of actors who were performing in the Teatro San Samuele in Venice. Opposite the house in which he had his lodgings lived a cobbler named Farussi, with his wife and their only daughter, Zanetta, a perfect beauty, 16 years old. The young actor fell in love with this girl and persuaded her to elope with him. It was the only way to possess her, for he would never have obtained the permission of her parents, in whose eyes all actors were abominable. I was born of their marriage 9 months later, on April 2nd, 1725. The following year, my mother placed me in the care of her mother, who had forgiven her when she learned that my father had promised never to make her become an actress. This is a promise which all actors make when they marry a daughter of respectable parents. They never keep it because their wives have no desire to make them do so. It was fortunate for my mother that she learned to be an actress, because otherwise she would have had no means of raising her 6 children when she was left a widow 9 years later. I was 1 year old when my father left me in Venice and went to London. It was in that great city that my mother appeared on the stage for the first time, and it was there also that in 1727 she gave birth to my brother Francesco, the famous painter of battle scenes now living in Vienna. Toward the end of 1728, my mother returned to Venice with her husband, and since she had become an actress, she continued to act. In 1730, she gave birth to my brother Giovanni, who died in Dresden in 1795. And in the 3 following years, she became the mother of 2 daughters. One of them died at an early age, and the other was married in Dresden, where she is still living today in 1798. I also had a posthumous brother who became a priest and died in Rome 15 years ago. Let us now come to the beginning of my existence as a thinking being. My memories began early in August 1733, when I was 8 years and 3 months old. I remember nothing before that time. Here is the first incident I can recall. I was standing in the corner of a bedroom, turned toward the wall with my head bent down and my eyes fixed on the blood that was trickling across the floor and flowing abundantly from my nose. My grandmother, who loved me dearly, came over to me, washed my face with cool water, and, unknown to anyone else in the room, in the house, made me get into a gondola with her and took me to Murano, a sparsely inhabited island 1.5 miles from Venice. After leaving the gondola, we entered a hovel in which we found an old woman sitting on a bed. She was holding a black cat in her arms, and there were 5 or 6 others around her. She was a witch. The 2 old women held a long discussion, of which I was probably the subject. Then the witch, having received a silver ducat from my grandmother, opened a large chest and put me inside it, telling me not to be afraid. I sat quietly in a corner of the chest, utterly indifferent to the sounds of laughter, weeping, singing, and shouting which came to me from the outside. Finally, I was taken out of the chest and my bleeding stopped. The extraordinary women then undressed me, put me in bed, burned some drugs, and collected the smoke in a sheet, wrapped me in it, uttered incantations, unwrapped me, and gave me 5 pleasant-tasting pills to swallow. It would no doubt be ridiculous to attribute my cure to these absurdities, but I think it would also be a mistake to deny absolutely that they may have contributed to it. The second incident which I remember occurred 3 months after my trip to Murano and 6 weeks before my father's death. I shall relate it to the reader in order to give him an idea of the way in which my character was developing. One day toward the middle of November, I was with my brother Francesco, 2 years younger than I, in my father's bedroom, attentively watching him doing optical work. A large piece of crystal caught my eye, and I immediately wanted to have it for myself. Seeing that I was unobserved, I seized the opportunity to put it in my pocket. A short time later, my father stood up and began looking for it. Not finding it, he told us that one of us must have it. My brother assured him he had not touched it, and guiltily though I was, I said the same thing. But my father, sure that he was right, threatened to search us and promised a beating to the liar. After pretending to look all over the room for the crystal, I found a favorable moment and dexterously slipped it into my brother's coat pocket. I was sorry at first, for I could have pretended to find it somewhere, but the evil deed was already done. My father, impatient with our futile efforts to find it, searched us, found it in my innocent brother's pocket, and gave him the promised punishment. 3 or 4 years later, I was foolish enough to boast to him of having placed this trick on him. He did not forgive me, and he never neglected an opportunity to take vengeance. 6 weeks after this adventure, my father was attacked by an abscess inside his head, which led him to the grave in 8 days. 2 days before his death, feeling his end drawing near, he asked to see us all beside his bed, in the presence of his wife and some Venetian nobleman named Gramani, whom he asked to become our protectors. My mother, being 6 months pregnant at this time, was dispensed from appearing on the stage until after Easter. Young and beautiful as she was, she refused. her hand to all those who sought to marry her, placing her trust in Providence. She hoped to be able to raise us by her own efforts. Abat Gramani undertook to find a boarding school for me in Padua through a friend of his, a chemist, who lived in that city. On April 2nd, 1734, my 9th birthday, I was taken to Padua, where the chemist took me to the house in which I was to live. It belonged to an old Slovenian woman. She was given 6 sequins as payment for my board and lodging 6 months in advance. For this small sum, she was to feed me, keep me clean, and have me educated at the school. My mother paid no attention when she complained that it was not enough. She kissed me, ordered me always to be obedient, and left me there. It was thus that she got rid of me. As soon as I was alone with the Slovenian woman, she took me up to the attic, where she showed me my bed in a row with 4 others, 3 of which belonged to 3 boys of my age who were then at school. The 4th belonged to the servant girl who had orders to watch us in order to prevent the little delinquencies in which schoolboys usually indulge. She then took me to the school, which was in the home of a young priest named Dr. Gozzi. When I returned to the Slovenian woman's house, I was given a wretched supper and put to bed, where 3 rather common species of vermin kept me from going to sleep. Besides that, the rats, which ran all over the attic and jumped on my bed, filled me with a terror that chilled my blood. It was there that I first became sensitive to unhappiness and learned to suffer with patience. The insects which devoured me diminished my fear of the rats, and my fear in turn made me less sensitive to the bites. The servant girl was deaf to my cries. I left my miserable bed as soon as dawn began to break. After complaining a little to the servant girl about all the pain I had endured, I asked her for a clean shirt, for mine was hideous to look at. She replied that we were to change shirts only on Sundays, and she laughed. When I threatened to complain to her mistress, for the first time in my life I wept with chagrin and anger when I heard my comrades jeer at me. The unfortunate boys shared my situation, but they were accustomed to it. My schoolmaster took particular care of my education. He seated me at his table, and in order to convince him that I appreciated this honor, I applied myself to my studies with all my strength. Within a month, I had learned to write so well that he began to teach me grammar, and 4 or 5 months later, I had made such rapid progress that he made me monitor of the school. One day he took me into his study and asked me if I would be willing to follow his suggestions in order to leave the Slovenian woman's house and come to live with him. Finding me delighted with his proposition, he had me copy 3 letters, which I sent to Abati Gramani, my friend Signor Baffo, and my kindly grandmother. In these letters I described all my sufferings and declared that I would die unless I were taken out of the Slovenian woman's house and placed in the care of my schoolmaster. who was willing to take me into his house for 2 sequins a month. Signor Vaffo went to see my grandmother, who did not know how to read, and sent me a letter announcing that within a short time I would find myself happier. A week later, my grandmother, who loved me until her death, arrived and calmly told the mistress of the house that she was going to take me away, instructing her to put all my clothes into my trunk. She then took me to the inn where she was staying, and we had dinner. She was so astonished by the voracity with which I ate that she herself ate almost nothing. Meanwhile, Dr. Gozzi came in, having been notified of her arrival. His appearance and manners immediately disposed her in his favor. He was a handsome young priest of 26, plump, modest, and polite. Within a quarter of an hour, all the arrangements had been made. My good grandmother paid him 24 sequins for a year in advance, but she kept me for 3 days to dress me as an abbé and have a wig made for me, since my uncleanliness had forced me to shave my head. She then installed me in Dr. Gozzi's house and recommended me to his mother. 6 months after I entered his house, Dr. Gozzi found himself without pupils, for they all deserted him when I became the sole object of his affections. This led him to decide to found his own boarding school, but it was 2 years before he was able to succeed in doing so. During that time, he taught me all he knew, which, to tell the truth, was not a great deal, but it was enough to initiate me into all the major branches of knowledge. He also taught me to play the violin, a skill I was later forced to put to use in circumstances with which the reader will become acquainted when the time comes. The good Dr. Gozzi was not a philosopher on any subject. He made me learn the logic of peripatetics and the ancient cosmography of Ptolemy, which I constantly ridiculed, exasperating him with theorems to which he could find no answer. His morals were irreproachable, and although he was not a bigot, he was extremely severe in matters of religion. Since everything was an article of faith for him, nothing was difficult for him to accept. According to him, the deluge had been universal. Before that disaster, men lived to be 1,000 years old, and God conversed with them. Noah had made his ark in 100 years, and the earth, suspended in the air, was at the center of the universe, which God had created from nothing. Each time I told him and proved to him that creation from nothing was an absurdity, he cut me short by telling me I was a fool. During Lent of 1736, my mother wrote that she was about to go to St. Petersburg. When she returned, Empress Anna Nirvana was not found. The Italian comedy sufficiently amusing. She notified Dr. Gozzi of her arrival in Padua, and he immediately took me to her inn. During Lent of 1736, my mother wrote that she was about to go visit St. Petersburg. When she returned, she notified Dr. Gozzi of her arrival in Padua. and he immediately took me to her inn. 6 months later, she summoned me to Venice, wishing to see me before leaving for Dresden, where she had accepted a lifetime engagement in the service of the Elector of Saxony. After my return to Padua, I was occupied with the study of law, in which I received my doctorate at the age of 16. I wrote a thesis in civil law entitled The Testament, and one in canon law entitled Utrum Hebrae Postin Construere Novas Synagogas. My inclination was to study medicine and become a practicing physician, but no one listened to me. Instead, I was urged to apply myself to the study of law, for which I felt an irrepressible disgust. I was told that I could make my fortune only by becoming a lawyer, and, worse still, an ecclesiastical lawyer. Attending the university made it necessary for me to go out alone. This astonished me, for until then I had never recognized myself as a free man, wishing to enjoy the full liberty which I believed myself to possess. I soon made some bad acquaintances among the most famous students. The most famous students were the worst scoundrels, libertines, gamblers, habitués of brothels, drunkards, seducers of honorable young girls, violent, treacherous, and incapable of the slightest sentiment of virtue. It was in the company of such young men that I began to know the world by studying it in the great book of experience. In this new way of life, not wishing to appear less rich than my new friends, I abandoned myself to expenditures which I could not afford. I sold or pawned everything I owned, and I acquired debts which I could not pay. Not knowing what to do, I wrote to my good grandmother to ask her to help me. But instead of sending me money, she came to Padua on the 1st of October, 1739, and thanked Dr. Gozzi for the care he had given me, and took me back to Venice with her. Just before my departure, Dr. Gozzi, in tears, made me a present of his most cherished possession, a relic of some saint or other. I would still have it if it had not been mounted in gold. The miracle it performed was to serve me in dire need. I later returned to Padua several times to work on my doctorate in law, and each time I stayed in the home of the kindly priest. He's just come back from Padua, where he finished his studies. This was the remark with which I was announced everywhere. As soon as it was pronounced, it attracted the taciturn observation of my equals in condition and age, the compliments of fathers and the caresses of old women, as well as those of some women who, not being old, wished to pass for such, in order to be able to embrace me with decency. The vicar of St. Samuel's, named Cello, after having installed me in his church, presented me to Monsignor Correr, Patriarch of Venice, who tonsured me, and 4 months later, and by special dispensation, bestowed the 4 minor orders on me. My grandmother's joy and satisfaction were extreme. I was immediately assigned good teachers with whom I was to continue my studies. Although Abati Gramani was supposedly my principal protector, I saw him only on very rare occasions. I became particularly attached to Signor Malipero, to whom Josello had introduced me. This Signor Malipero was a 70-year-old senator who, no longer wishing to concern himself with affairs of state, led a happy life in his palace, eating well and spending every evening in the company of a selected circle of ladies who had turned their years of beauty to profit, and intelligent men who knew everything that happened in the city. It was in his home that I made the acquaintance of Signor Manzoni. This worthy It was in his home that I made the acquaintance of Signora Manzoni. This worthy lady filled me with great devotion and gave me some very wise advice. If I had followed it, my life would not have been so stormy, but also I would not have found it worth writing about. Becoming acquainted with such honorable ladies made me wish to please them with my appearance, but my vicar objected to this, and he was seconded by my grandmother. One day he took me aside and told me that, as an ecclesiastic, I ought to think of pleasing God with my heart, rather than pleasing the world with my outer appearance. He disapproved of the excessive attention I gave to my hair and the overly delicate odor of my pomade. He told me the devil had seized me by the hair and that I would be damned if I continued to take the same care of it. I replied by citing the example of hundreds of abbés who scented themselves with musk, but were not regarded as damned, and were left in peace. I told him I regretted not being able to obey him, and that if I had wanted to live in uncleanliness, I would have become a Capuchin, not an abbé. My reply must have irritated him a great deal, because 3 or 4 days later, he quietly crept to my bed while I was asleep, mercilessly cut off my forelock, and then slipped out of the room. When I awakened a short time later, my hands acquainted me with all the horror of his outrageous punishment. What plans of vengeance I formed when, mirror in hand, I saw the state in which the audacious priest had placed me. The audacious priest had placed me. I turned over 100 dark designs in my mind as I dressed myself, and then I went to see a lawyer to ask him if I could bring a lawsuit against the vicar. He told me that an entire family had recently been ruined for having cut off a Slovenian's mustache, which was much less important than a forelock, and that if I wanted to bring a lawsuit against the vicar, I had only to give him my orders, which I did. Not wishing to show myself in society until My hair had grown back. I went to bed early that night. After 10 hours of sleep, I had cooled off my senses. I found myself less heated. But no less determined to proceed with my lawsuit against the Fakah. I was prepared to go to see my lawyer when a hairdresser entered my room and told me he had been sent by Signor Malipero to arrange my hair in such a way that I would be able to come to his house, for he wanted me to have dinner with him that day. After examining the damage, he laughed and told me he would soon make my hair more elegant than ever. True enough, when he had evened it out, I was so pleased with my appearance that I considered myself avenged. I went to my lawyer and told him to drop the lawsuit. I then went to see the Vicar, but he was not at home. Wishing to wait for his return, I began to speak with his niece, Angela, and soon fell in love with her. She told me she had been wanting to meet me, and that she would be delighted to have me tell her the story of the haircut her venerable uncle had given me. Falling in love with Angela was a fateful event in my life, for it was the cause of 2 other loves which, in their turn, led me to many others, which finally made me give up my ecclesiastical career. But let us take things as they come and not anticipate the future.